What if you were born at the exact same time on the exact same day, but in a different location? Well, that's where locational astrology comes in. I'm going to show you in astrocartography a way to look at what's called your relocated chart. Relocated charts have been around for thousands of years, almost as long as astrology itself. And so when you're looking at what's now popular as astrocartography, what you're really looking at is a map with a cheat sheet to the relocated chart. It shows where planets are touching the angles. But the relocated chart itself is just as important. That's why it gets its own cheat sheet. So this video will dive right into relocated charts. I'm Kim Mott, and welcome to my astrocartography playlist. We're going to look at the map and the birth chart of Jim Lewis. Who's Jim Lewis? He's like some sports guy? No, actually, we're talking about Jim Lewis, the founder of astrocartography as a brand. Again, astrocartography is not new. Relocated charts are not new, and astromapping is very, very ancient in itself. But this brand name of astrocartography that's now so popular and ubiquitous on the internet was actually coined as a term by Jim Lewis. And so here's his birth chart. So we're going to look at his map, his natal chart, and his relocated chart. Jim Lewis actually considered it unethical to not consider all three, including all of the placements and aspects in your natal chart, and very much analyzing the relocated chart in a reading with astrocartography. He considered just looking at the lines to be very misleading and actually unethical. He had students where he would certify them while he was still alive, and he would not pass them if they did not use all three and synthesize them. So that's why relocated charts are so important. If you're going to get a reading with a professional, you want to check into whether they're actually looking at your relocated charts in the locations they're recommending. I'm going to show you some extreme examples why in Jim Lewis's own charts. So his natal chart, his birth chart is here. He was born June 5th, 1941 in Yonkers, New York in the United States. And he died young. He died when he was like 53 or 54 years old in the 1990s. So some of his students who he taught have actually been practicing astrocartography longer than he ever did, and have been practicing since 2013. So having a look at his chart is very fascinating. A few things that we notice right away, like when I do a client reading, I'm always looking to their natal chart first. One thing we want to do is get familiar so we can see what changes in what we call a relocated chart. I'm going to show you exactly visually what I mean in a second about a relocated chart. But the concept is the time and place of birth is what generates the chart itself. So the day, the time, the moment, and the location. We leave out part of the equation, a huge part of the equation, when we don't consider location in astrology. So that's what locational astrology specializes in, is where in time are we experiencing these things. So at the moment and location of his birth there in New York, this is where everything aligned in the tropical system. I use whole sign for house division, but you can use any house system that is, the one that is your go-to, that you resonate with the most. Interestingly, with astrocartography, because it's tethered to the four angles of the birth chart, the ascendant, the midheaven, the descendant, and the IC, as you can see, those are all marked here on the lines themselves. There is no difference between sidereal and tropical because it's tethered to the angles. So even if you're a sidereal astrologer, you can definitely practice astrocartography. So back to Jim's chart. Some major, headlines that I see here is like his Pluto is conjunct the ascendant. Again, the ascendant is one of those four angles: the ascendant, midheaven, descendant, and IC. So when you have a planet natally right on one of your four angles, it's being supercharged. It is like plugging it into the outlet and leaving it charging your whole entire lifetime. That Pluto is going to show up for you big time. This can bring a very intense type presence to have Pluto on the ascendant. Pluto is our personal power. It's the planet of intensity. It's also the planet of transformation. So he could even become a transformational figure or transform those around him as part of the basis of his personality and how he projects himself out into the world. So one of the first things I take note is, does the person already have, a planet on an angle in their birth chart? He doesn't have anything touching the midheaven or the descendant, but he does also have the moon right on his IC, you can see they're 5 degrees apart, 4 degrees apart there, actually. Out of 360 degrees on this wheel, they're only 4 degrees apart. And when it's a luminary like the sun or the moon, that's pretty, important headline in the chart to have it being touching an angle. The IC being our home and family life, our private life, the inner core of our foundation, that kind of thing. And he has his conjunct the IC. He has his moon conjunct the IC, meaning he probably is or was a very nostalgic type person. I might have had a very strong tie to family. And in whole sign, the IC can travel, adding some nuance to the chart. And so he might have even had a really important tie to either siblings or maybe a bit of a difficulty with it, or maybe an important tie to mom, unless that was a rocky relationship, which possibly, could have been just because by sign he is, got that moon, square, the Chiron there. So there could have been some tension there. I'm not sure. I don't know about his relationship with mom or if he had any siblings or anything like that. But these are some things that stand out to me. But also even friends and neighbors and acquaintances. Like his neighborhood would be very important to him, having that IC in the third house. And nearby things would be very important. And I know he was actually a big part of his community. He was LGBTQ plus everybody. So he was, he identified as a gay man, and he was very discreet about it, but he was also a prominent figure in that community in San Francisco, where he lived most of his adult life. So kind of surrounding himself with nearby neighbors that were important to him. Okay, so now we have 2 planets on angles. One other thing to note, Hellenistic astrologers may not do this, but I think it's important too, because I've seen too many examples of it working. Even though I do use whole sign and a lot of, and very informed by Hellenistic astrology, I do break with it here and there to bring in some modern elements, including Chiron, but also considering sign, considering 2 planetary bodies that are out of sign from one another, still conjunct, because you can see these are only a few degrees apart. They're 4 degrees apart. He has Chiron in Cancer here. He has Pluto in Leo. So having those that close together would add to this concept of him being this almost like a dominating figure. Like he's the type of person probably that walked into a room and the room shifted and kind of he can take over the room. But there could be something here that's almost like maybe he suffered abuse when he was a kid or something like that, that causes him to not feel his power. And it can cause this situation that when you feel powerless, sometimes you overcompensate. And so even though he has this absolute ability here with this configuration to become like a transformative figure to those around him, and maybe even a great teacher and mentor, which he did, especially with the Chiron, sextile his North Node. But, it could also be where he kind of is wounding toward other people, or, maybe comes off as aggressive or things like that. Pluto on the ascendant itself can be rather intimidating to those experiencing it. It can be this like charismatic, magnetic figure, but also kind of like intimidating. And the person with that configuration may not even understand why. They're like, why is everyone intimidated by me? But it still has that presence to it. And then adding Chiron in can add almost like a woundedness to it. And sometimes that causes the person to almost like be a little bit abusive toward others. He also has a square between his Mars and Sun. And I know even people watching this channel, some of you actually went to Jim Lewis workshops or even were friends with him. I've had readings with some of you. And so maybe you can add to this. I'm coming off of things that he said in lectures, things that were written about him in the obituary, things that I've talked with people who knew him, including Michael Earlywine, who was the person who created the first astrocartography software, along with Jim Lewis. He's 84 years old now. I did a video interview with him. I'm going to publish it on this channel soon. But with this square to the Sun and Mars adding to this, maybe is where his litigiousness came from. I've been told over and over, and I even read it in his obituary, written down that he was a very litigious figure. And it was just a very nice way to say that he liked suing people, or at least threatening to sue them. And I've even heard personal, one-on-one stories about that too, including Michael Earlywine. That's how they met. Jim Lewis approached him threatening to sue him for developing local space software. And he wanted to dominate all of locational astrology. So they fought it out and eventually became friends, and then it collaborated. But this kind of assertiveness that it comes off as aggressive. With a square, sometimes there's a tension, that kind of thing. This Mars square the sun is going to come into play as well later on, and it's something I'm going to show you in a relocated chart on his astrocartography map. But I just kind of wanted to point that out. He also has the sun opposing his lot of fortune. So even his greatest joys might actually bring him some tension as well, because it's a tug of war between where do I find my greatest fortune and greatest joy in life, and where's my will and my destiny unfolding and my vitality, and this way I'm projecting my luminary sun out into the world. Interestingly, also, that the eighth house has to do with finances and shared values and shared resources, and even royalties and client payments and things like that. And this is the groups that he would associate with. So even kind of being aggressive toward his own astrologer friends and colleagues in that community here of the 11th house, where his sun is located, that tended to play out. So this maybe is where his litigiousness came from. I'm not saying he was like all bad. I'm not trying to disparage Jim Lewis beyond the grave. He can't speak for himself here. But that's just kind of because I was looking for in his chart, like what would speak to that. And then I realized that that's probably what was going on there. He also has Mercury in the 12th, which is an interesting placement for an astrologer, especially someone as prominent in astrology as he was. And he received awards and accolades from the astrology community. He's got both of his benefic planets here in that house of groups and gains and goals and aspirations and groups of friends as well and friendships. But having the Mercury here is kind of interesting because it's also something that shows that he might have had like a direct line to the collective unconscious, or maybe being able to even channel ideas and things from the other side. I read that he also had a slight stutter. And so maybe that's where, because 12th house can be where we have some suffering and trauma as well. So maybe with Chiron and Mercury being co-present in the 12th house, that could be maybe where that stutter came from in his communication, because he has Mercury, his messenger of the gods, the communicator planet here. But he definitely would have been very, very well liked in groups, maybe just really shone, like his light just really was very, very visible in groups of people. He was a public speaker all around the world, very well received, and was a really great teacher as well with this Jupiter here and Venus. The attractiveness probably was just like there. He probably was really well liked by groups when he was teaching them and doing seminars and things like that. So this chart makes a lot of sense for me. I've seen a lot of inventors or techie types or people who bring new technologies, new ways of doing things, innovations, that sort of thing, into the public sphere through career with Uranus there. So having Uranus, it's not terribly far away from Saturn as well. Saturn gives this work ethic in the 10th house. It also is a bit of a slog. It makes you work really hard for it, but it really is the planet of mastery. So having those so close together in the sign of Taurus here, just head down, keep it grinding, keep steady, keep that pace, and keep on producing and having that slow and steady ambition was definitely also things that I've heard about him and read about him as well. So that makes a lot of sense for him to have this very like innovative energy here, but even alongside Saturn. He doesn't have anything conjunct the ascendant, like I said, but he has the descendant in Aquarius. Interestingly, he also has the vertex here in Sagittarius. So both the lot of fortune and vertex for him landed in the 5th house and whole sign here in Sagittarius. This makes so much sense as well in his way of working and things like that, because the vertex, is fate and fated encounters and just things that kind of come together, almost like the invisible hand of fate kind of thing. And in the sign of Sagittarius, this would give like the most insatiable explorer type figure, and that those fated experiences would come together in that sign of Sagittarius of, global thinking, travel, teaching, exploring philosophical ideas and mind expanding things, or seeing the bigger picture, that sort of thing. He also has his, like I said, the moon here in Libra, in the 3rd house of communication and teaching and those kind of things. So not only is it neighbors and siblings and nearby things, he's got that in that communicator house. So he would definitely have this like very inquisitive mind, that sort of thing. So the reason I'm going through his chart for so long before finally showing you a relocated chart is because this is the process. Get used to the natal chart placements, see what's going on already, especially look at those aspects that are very headline news, important aspects, because when you go, for him, we'll talk about his Mars line. and his son, down in Australia. And those who know, don't spoil it in the comments or anything. But of what happened with him when he traveled to a Mars line in Australia once throughout his lifetime. So now we're going to hop over to the map. We're going to have a little look here at what's going on with his map. You can see these lines, these curvy lines of the ascendant descendant lines. These ones that appear to be straight up and down are the midheaven IC lines. They're actually not straight. They're actually circling the globe, and one side is the IC and one side is the MC. And that's just, important to know because it's a little bit of a way to identify which line is which very quickly. But you can see how his natal chart is wrapped around the globe. You can see his Jupiter ascending line here is this way, and then you can see that it's descending on this side of the globe. So when you see these crossings all gnarled up, at the polar regions, that's because it's wrapping around a sphere, and this is just a 2D depiction of a 3D situation. All right, so nearest to his birthplace is one thing I always check is what's going on near the birthplace, because that is what's going on in the natal chart. Remember, if I said that if they have a planet, if the person has a planet, or you do in your chart, already touching or conjunct within a few degrees of one of the angles for him, Pluto on the ascendant, Moon on the IC, those are going to show up the closest to your birthplace. So that Moon IC is the tightest orb that he has, the tightest, amount of degrees away. So that'll be the closest line to his birthplace. Here you can see that it is about like 210 or 310, 190 miles, something like that. I do about 250 miles is the strongest, someone's going to experience the orb of a line. So either side of it, you can go about 250 miles. I do take it out to about 400 miles, 650 kilometers, especially at like a crossing like this, where these guys are kind of adding fuel to the fire of adding energy to those. Or if it's just something that's prominent in their chart, they're, especially the luminaries, something like that. Something that seems to have a little power punch to it, I will take it out to about 400 miles, especially because even for myself and clients, that's something that they're still feeling that far out sometimes. It's really like up to you, your judgment. And you can even, if it's your own chart, really think back about experiences and how far out, if you were able to travel, did you experience those things. Next up is his Chiron on the ascendant, because even though this Chiron here is in that 12th house, it's still technically conjunct his ascendant, as well as this Pluto conjunct his ascendant. So that's how it's showing up on the map here. This, to me, no wonder he left home and moved away. This is not looking like a very fun configuration. It looks very emotionally challenging, and possibly even just like traumatizing, to be honest, especially early in life. People younger in life, these Pluto lines and Chiron lines can be really tough. Even though this Moon on the IC could be considered very cozy, and those kind of nostalgic and feeling wrapped up in a cocoon, that kind of thing, adding these guys in just shows that, he moved out of that region for a reason. And maybe he talked about that during his lifetime, not sure. But here we go. We're going to get into some relocated chart information, just so you can see now the difference, now that you know about the birth chart, what's going on with his relocated chart. If you look over to the top left, this is showing the relocated chart. His natal chart, his birth chart is what we went through at the beginning of the video with those birth placements. Now look at this relocated chart. If I move this east to west, you can see my mouse moving east to west. You can see that chart actually relocating. In San Francisco, this is where his planets land. They're quite different. You can see that small stellium of Venus, the Sun, and Jupiter is now in his first house. And really, you can see that depicted here. Like I said, this is a cheat sheet. You can see that Venus is now conjunct his ascendant. You can see Venus and his ascendant right there. So instead of being a Leo rising like he was born, his relocated chart shows him as a Gemini rising in this location, all through California, this area. And you can see that those two are just a few degrees apart, Venus and the ascendant, and that's why this is a Venus ascendant line. So when you have the ascendant is always in the first house. Like I said, in whole sign, the IC and the MC can travel a bit depending on the latitude. But the ascendant will always land in the first, descendant will always land in the seventh. This is the house of self. So he's got the two benefics in his house of self. He's also within range here not terribly close in, but in San Francisco, he would be, somewhat in range of this. He would take it out to like 800 miles in some cases. Like I said, I kind of max out at 400, but he might feel a whiff of this sun line as well. Either way, it's in his first house and would have probably felt great. If we'll get closer in here, you can see that he was sandwiched between, when living in San Francisco, that Venus ascending line, but also this vertex descendant line. If you remember that vertex that I mentioned about fated encounters that he has in Sagittarius, but you can see that he has that at 23 degrees Sag. He actually has that also in his relocated chart. And you can see that this vertex line here would be at 23 degrees Sagittarius. There's a bug in this software, so it shows up wrong, but it would actually be here in his 7th house. That's why it is a vertex descending line. Now, Jim Lewis did not use the vertex during his lifetime. He may have come around to it. I didn't come around to it until a couple of years ago when an Eastern European astrologer set me onto it. And I can tell you that with clients all around the world, and including my chart as well, these are very powerful spots. I can see people get drawn to them, just really, really sucked into them, and they have just like this sense of fate about going to the place sometimes. Or like they'll get sent there by their parents or their school or by a job or something. There's somehow that they end up in the place very often. Not always, but it's kind of pretty common, I notice. So he has that vertex on the descendant too, so maybe even followed a lover there or something, who knows. But you can see in that relocated chart that, it's quite nice for him. That's probably why he lived so long in that location. It would even increase sort of that powerfulness of his Pluto in the area of communications and teaching and those sort of things, which definitely activated for him. It also takes it off of the ascendant and out of the first house, which relieves some of that pressure of the intensity and power of Pluto and puts it in a very nice kind of quiet cadent house there. So that's what his relocated chart looks like. You can see that he also has Mars up here in the 10th. That would give a lot of drive toward career ambition and that kind of thing. That, coming out of the quiet 8th house into this angular 10th house and putting it somewhat near the midheaven as well would increase the martial type of activity that he would be doing. But that's all in that public sphere, the go get him outward action energy of Mars. You can see that it's not terribly far away from him. So if he did public speaking in these areas, which, there's like Sedona and all kinds of places, nearby, he's very close to that here. I'm not sure, but I would imagine he would have probably done some teaching or speaking or going to astrological meetups maybe in that area. He also has his Mercury on the ascendant very close to like Santa Fe and Albuquerque and Taos and those kind of things. Might even be financially a little, fortunate for him popping it into the 2nd house there. And it's also the ruler of his 2nd house. So that's why I mentioned that. These charts, when you relocate them or you're looking at these lines, you have to really analyze the birth chart first. So when I look for, people always think, oh, it's Jupiter or Venus, that's where I'll get money. Actually, I look first for the 2nd house ruler, and his is Mercury. So popping it out of the 12th house, putting it on the ascendant, this actually might have been a place where he had a lot of clients or things like that. Who knows? So that's a look at his relocated chart in the area where he lived out his life. He actually passed away there in 1995, February 21st, at the age of 53. So, being on a nice Venus line, even though he had a little bit of afflicted Venus here and there, it was in a fortunate house, but he had a little square to Neptune here, might have given some self-esteem issues, especially with that Neptune being in the 2nd house and this being Venus. And maybe that's how it played out a little bit of him having this insecurity around his brand. He trademarked and patented everything and all this stuff, which have all now expired. But, part of the reason that he was so litigious was he was protecting this brand that he had built. And even at the end of his lifetime here in this area, he said, I feel like part of my illness that he was dying from was attributed to that stress, that emotional stress, that really, intense configuration he had here was really activated around that feeling of maybe powerlessness or giving his power away to others by letting them use his brand or something. And he kind of regretted that toward the end of his life. So I just wanted to show his Europe really quickly. You can see that here, instead of Venus on the ascendant, if instead of California he had moved to Portugal, you can see me relocating the chart. Again, if I move this east to west, you can see that top left, the relocated chart. You can see the placements starting to change. In Portugal, he would have had Venus up on the midheaven in the 10th house. His Venus is always going to stay at 27 degrees Gemini. His sun's always going to stay at 14 degrees Gemini. His Jupiter will stay at the same degree of Gemini at 2 degrees. But they will change their house placement because, as you can see, when I relocate this chart, the houses are not changing, but the signs are spinning around. You have to go pretty drastically east to west, especially in like Europe because it's small, to see that change. Or you could go very drastically north to south. So if like he had been born in South Africa versus Europe, you can see that change. If he had been born in Norway, that would have been his chart. But over in like Spain, Portugal, you can see that midheaven is touching Venus there versus how it was in California where the ascendant was touching Venus. Now, if he had been born over in Thailand, or we're looking at his relocated chart in Thailand, you can see that the Venus is now touching his descendant. So again, these lines, they're not just lines. They're showing angularity in the relocated chart, a planet touching an angle. And that's why they have these labels here. So that was the part of the genius of this method. Again, he didn't invent this method. There were already astro locality maps. There was already astro mapping. In fact, the first computer-generated map happened in 1966. I'll talk more about that in a video I have about the myths of astrocartography. You can check that out if you want on my channel, my YouTube. But, he really, really perfected the technique, came up with some great innovations around it, pioneered a lot of new stuff, and put everything together in a package of things we could follow. And it's really been passed down. So he's left a really nice legacy with astrocartography. And I would like to just show you that little thing I was teasing you about earlier with his Mars. Remember that he has Mars in that 8th house, squaring his sun in the 11th house. So you can see that, a certain astrocartographer, and maybe even him, I'm not sure how he evaluated this before going, but he went to Sydney, Australia. And if I look at this, and I'm kind of not very educated about astrocartography, and I've listened to everybody on TikTok saying, go to your Jupiter, go to your sun, I might think this looks amazing. And it really could be amazing as well. But look what's happening in Sydney. He's quite close to this Mars line. He's only 130, 140 miles away. It's, and I'm using miles just because I'm American, sorry. You can also say it's in kilometers. And he's also even a little bit in range of this sunlight. You can see that it's still within that 400-mile range. He's probably still feeling that nice, cozy sun on the IC. Lovely, lovely Jupiter on the IC a little farther out. But if you're just only looking at the lines, this is again why Jim Lewis considered it unethical to only look at the lines. You might think, this is great. But now we're remembering in his birth chart, he has the Mars squaring the sun. That's why the Mars is showing up on the ascendant here. See the Mars on the ascendant? And the sun is on the IC. The sun is on the IC. So they're still in square to each other. They just are relocated. Now he has Mars in the first house of self. Remember how I said that's the house of self? This could even involve things that involve your body, events that happen to you and play out in reality rather than an internal process or something emotional or psychological. And then he's got the sun on the IC. This can also be, remember I was saying private life, home life, foundational self, those kind of things. But look what it's crossing here. Jim Lewis also, just like the vertex, didn't, to my knowledge, use the lot of fortune. But remember how he has that lot of fortune here in his same house as the vertex. Lot of fortune can be, and remember these are opposite to each other in his chart too, the sun and lot of fortune. Opposing each other at 180 degrees can be a very tense aspect. The lot of fortune is not only our greatest joys in life and things, but it's also related to the body because it's related to the moon in our chart. And it can be this turning of the wheel of fate and fortune. Sometimes it can be just a moment in time where the wheel of fate and fortune changes. You can see that it's crossing just off the coast of Sydney with Mars. Remember what I said about crossings? Those are what actually form parans. I'll do another video about parans, but right here at this crossing is very, very, very close to Sydney. So that amplifies these two even more. And he got hit by a car in Sydney. He was visiting. He was walking down, I guess, Military Road in Sydney. And actually, he attributed it to that Mars line. And I'm sure he was probably aware that he had the sun square Mars. So the Mars being right in that first house of self, the sun being down here in the fourth house, which, ancient astrologers called that one of the houses of death, so he actually had a little bit of danger going, especially with it crossing that lot of fortune. And I don't know during his lifetime if he ever noticed that. But that was one of the first things I've noticed, because I've seen lots of charts, including like Kim Kardashian getting robbed in Paris and stuff, where it was actually to do with a timing activating a lot of fortune line. So, you can also add in timing to this. I don't know what day or even year this happened to him, but you could add in, like his progressed lines or transit lines, and even see what was going on in the chart at that time. And this is called cyclocartography, also innovated by Jim Lewis. This would probably be one of his main contributions to locational astrology, is the timing aspect. So this is just set to today, so it would be irrelevant. But what I'm saying about a transit activating this lot of fortune, it could have been a moment in time. Those go by in an hour or two that actually activated that and turned his wheel of fate and fortune. But anyway, that even made it into his obituary that he got hit by a car in Sydney near his Mars line. So I thought I would point that out to you, and also the importance of the relocated chart. That Mars. Again, if I relocate this chart on the top left there to Sydney, it's a very important headline to have Mars, conjunct your ascendant. You may even feel a little more adventurous or have a lot more vitality and energy. And with that natal square to his sun, he might already be kind of like the risk taker type. Maybe even just crossing, I can make it before this car comes or something like that. Or maybe just so forward looking on a Mars ascendant that he just didn't notice a car was. That's all I'm going to show you on his relocated chart. I'm going to show you David Bowie's relocated charts as well, so it's not just one example. Also, in my video, How to Read Your Astrocartography Map, I show David Bowie's map in astro.com, which is a free place that you can find your lines and things like that. You'll have to manually cast a relocated chart. To do that, I'll show you the way to do that. But I just want to show you, he was born in London, right on his Venus midheaven line, which makes a lot of sense for a musician, especially one that even influenced things like fashion and aesthetics and beauty and things like that. So, he was born on that line. But if we look, even, like I said, when you're in Europe, you have to go pretty far east to west to change the relocated chart. Now, at his home place in London, you can see his sun is in the 12th house. And he was so tapped into the collective unconscious. That's why his music was touching our souls, that kind of thing. But you get him over to like Berlin, you can see not much is going to change, but he's going to change his degree of the ascendant quite a lot. He's at 26 degrees Aquarius versus the natal 3 degrees. But you take him over into like more of Eastern Europe, you can see what happens. And he did spend time in Eastern Europe as well. Now his sun's in the 11th house. So it pops out of that 12th. That's quite different for him. I also want to show you where his wife is from. She's from Somalia. He said it's the only time he's ever been speechless was the time that he met her. And he had love at first sight. They had a very, very romantic relationship, but he had his sun and his Mars on the midheaven in the relocated chart. That's why you have a sun midheaven and you have a Mars midheaven, Epsilon, in Somalia. So this, and like I said, this is your public life. This is social status. It's not just career. This changed his social status to a married guy rather than somebody who was like into just the sex, drugs, and rock and roll, as he talked about very freely. I also wanted to show you his relocated chart over here in New York, where his career really took off with worldwide fame, even beyond what he'd achieved over on his lines in Europe. This is the Venus on the ascendant in this location. So you can see now, instead of the midheaven, the Venus is on the ascendant here in the first house in Sagittarius. This is actually where he lived out the end of his life. He really enjoyed being in Woodstock, New York. So I just wanted to show another example of relocated charts and how that works. And his chart is completely different from Jim Lewis's, as you can see, very different configurations. Instead of a Sun-Mars square, he has a Sun-Mars conjunction. Those kind of things are totally different from Jim's chart. And I just wanted to show you again, if you keep your eye on the relocated chart, as I move this around the globe, you can see as I move east to west, that chart is spinning. Again, David Bowie's sun is always going to stay at the exact same degree, 17 degrees Capricorn, but it's going to change house placement. And again, houses are representative of topic areas of life. So what topic area is getting highlighted when you make one of these planets conjunct one of these angles? I also do private readings and teach workshops. Check out my website, kimmott.com. Plenty of free resources if you want to DIY your map, or again, I'll do a reading with you. Last thing I wanted to show you really quickly is if you want to cast your own chart, if you're not using software, especially this kind of software, and a lot of people are asking me which software I'm using. I will be doing a video in the next week or so comparing all the different softwares, and I'm actually going to plan to teach a tutorial class on this actual software I'm using here, because it's actually very difficult to learn. It's the toughest one to learn, but I think it has the best features. So I'll be coming at you with that soon. But I just wanted to say that if you need to cast your own relocated chart, it's a built-in feature in most of this, in all the software. So Solar Fire, Astro Gold, those kind of things, are you're going to be able to do a subsidiary chart. You'll cast a relocated chart and you'll type in the location. This software is amazing because you can do the relocated chart real time. And if you're using astro.com to pull your relocated chart, you'll have to do it one by one. So you'll want to look at your map, kind of select a location or 5 or 10, and then you're going to go to the drop down menu. Again, I'll just show you this little thing here, the little whatever they call this thing, and then go down to extended chart selection. So out of everything you see here, you're not going to go to locational astrology. You'll go under horoscope drawings and data, and then you'll go to extended chart selection. You'll land on this page here. You'll see this up top. I'm doing David Bowie's chart. Instead of natal chart wheel, you're going to scroll all the way down and do a relocation chart. But you actually see how it says needs ref place. It needs a reference place other than your birthplace. So instead of selecting this, because even though I select this, it's going to default back, I still have to go down to default settings down here. Click that plus sign. You'll see that I've already changed it to New York, New York. It was set to his birthplace, which is London. But the way you do that is you'll go to modify data and you can choose any place. So it doesn't have to be New York. You'll whatever the birthplace is will show up here if you've already entered the chart. You're going to have to enter your chart data first before doing any of this. But after you've done that, you just create a birth chart and then come here to this page. You'll be able to change the town from the birthplace to a new one. I'm going to actually just leave it at New York since it will be a relocated chart since he was born in London. You'll click save and it'll come back. You'll hit continue. And now see it defaulted back to natal chart wheel. You're going to go back down, scroll all the way almost to the end and see relocation chart. Now we've got the reference place in New York, relocation chart. You can do different styles, like different, ways of looking at it. You can also change like house calculation and things like that. You can say what things you want it to aspect. All those options are available to you. The default is going to be Placidus, so if you want to do whole signs, you can change it or you can choose whichever one you like. You're going to show the chart, and now we've got a relocated chart for David Bowie for New York. It's not going to relocate it like you saw in the software to every different place. Real time, you're going to need to cast a chart one by one by one based on which location that you've kind of scoped out on the map. You'll have to select what you think might be interesting for you to check out, and then you'll cast a chart for each location you're interested in. So maybe it's better to research your map, to make a list, and then come and cast charts, and you'll be able to save them. You'll be able to save them into your Astro data bank, or you can save them to your computer. You'll see here that it relocated his little stellium here of Mercury, Mars, and the Sun away from the 12th house into the 2nd house in New York. And then, everything else is also relocated. So that's how you do the free ones. And as always, feel free to take advantage of all the free resources on my website, kimmott.com. I actually have tons of things to help you DIY your own map for free. Using those online tools, and there's interpretations for every planetary line. You can also book a one-on-one session with me, and I will do all the heavy lifting for you. Happy astro travels!